All right, happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Go 24/7 podcast. Bryce Koon alongside a tired Sonny Shipp who traveled the weekend, caught some. He's trying to catch some Z's in between his work and being a dad and seeing some good soccer. But he's back, obviously, in Louisiana, and we're talking a little recruiting. And Sonny, it was a busy weekend in Baton Rouge, no doubt about it. A big one, obviously, leading up to the spring game this upcoming weekend. A lot of big-time visitors, a lot of big names out of Duncanville. But, I think one thing that I've kind of noticed a trend on and saw a little bit on social media was we saw a lot of commits across the SEC, across the country start to pop here over the last 3 or 4 days. Now, it's been a little quiet on LSU's front. I guess you could say that. They had their time a little bit earlier in the spring, but how important was this weekend in shaping the 2024 class, which we all know is really shaping up to be a really fun one and an exciting one, intriguing one?
Yeah, and I think what you saw with the SEC commitments that you were referencing was kids being on campus for the spring games. Those spring game weekends kind of give them a little more atmosphere. You got fans on campus, you got tailgating, you got a lot of stuff that kind of makes the SEC the pageantry that it has. And so, I think that's what the flurry of commitments was about. But I think, with LSU coming up, they got their spring game on Saturday. I'm not going to toss any names out there or anything, but in the past, we've seen guys go ahead and get on board just for that, because they're on campus and because they're seeing things from a little more of a personal look. But yeah, man, I think that when with LSU, as far as this weekend goes, that was a good weekend. It was a good weekend in terms of who they were able to get in. Anytime you're able to get a 5-star on campus, the number 2 cornerback, Kobe Black, and you keep him on campus for the weekend, that's a win. That's a good one. You mentioned the Duncanville trio, 4-star safety Kadavian Dotson came back, 4-star running back Caden Durham came back, had an extended stay until Sunday, like Tylen Singleton, the 4-star hybrid safety linebacker out of Manny. He also made it in. And I think what's also important to note is that these guys didn't just come in with coaches. These guys came in with their parents. They brought either mom, dad, maybe both of them, some siblings. So it was the weekend. The weekend, I'm told from talking to sources who was on campus, I'm told that the weekend was kind of like it had more of an official visit feel to it than it did the unofficial visit. And so that's big when you get those kind of reviews from folks who's there taking everything in.
Yeah, you put up a great piece on Monday kind of, going through that. We're not going to spoil everything. We want people to make sure they sign up at Go 24/7. And if I'm not mistaken,
that 50% off deal.
50% off that would end here on Tuesday. So we need to make sure that we get some people on that. But let's start off with Tylen Singleton. Now, this is obviously a kid that he's one of the good ones we talk about when we talk about the fact that he could play safety or linebacker at the next level. It's just really a matter of what kind of weight is he going to put on and what's the best, fit for him. Where do you feel like this staff sits, and what'd you kind of hear about how he kind of felt about the visit? I know that, Kim Mulkey pitched in. You talk about that official visit type feeling. Kim Mulkey pitched in as well with a little bit of the family in Singleton visiting.
Yeah, that's a that was a cool little nugget I was able to pick up. That Tylen Singleton's mom, she's a big LSU women's basketball fan. Makes the drive down from Manny, to go down and to watch the Tigers several times throughout the seasons. And his sister is also a big Kim Mulkey fan. And so, it's pretty cool when your women's, the leader of your women's basketball program is about a week and a half off of just winning the national championship. You would think that, hey, if there's ever a time to get away, it's now, right? And and she was on campus. She was on campus helping the LSU football program recruit, meeting with having some fun, meeting with the parent, meeting with the Singletons and stuff, and chopping it up with them a little bit. Even Caden Durham's sister's a big Kim Mulkey fan. She jumped on the phone with him and chopped it with his sister and chopped it up with her for a little bit and stuff. So little things like that, little small details like that, I think is something that the LSU staff really did their homework on and really kind of honed in on for the weekend. I think you got to toss a lot of kudos out to the people behind the scenes. Your recruiting specialist, Jordan Arsenal, Sherman Wilson, Bobby Barham plays a big role in that. You got your director of personnel, player personnel guys, J.R. Belton, Mike Ferrara, Kendall Lambert, who just came on one of the recruiting operations over the recruiting operations on campus. So, they really had an all hands on deck approach to the weekend. And I think that, I think they looked at this as an opportunity to, maybe get that second official visit in June or later on, that if you can really knock their socks off and really roll that red carpet out on this trip right here, then you can kind of just piggyback on that and maybe kind of close the deal on that official visit. So, I think it was a good weekend in terms of, not only who they were able to get, who they got on campus. Wasn't quantity, it was all about quality. And there was a ton of quality on campus. And just, kudos to that staff for being able to, to get some of these these big high name prospects on campus.
Yeah, and it makes you feel a little bit better about where the Tigers sit with Tylen Singleton. Obviously, SEC teams coming after him. Oklahoma's in on him as well. But, man, just to be able to keep a kid, like you said, for the whole weekend, and that's what they would do this weekend, is really huge. I wanted to go over to the Duncanville trio here. And, you got Dotson, you got Durham, and you got the 2025 kid and the five-star receiver Moore, who – I took a look at his tape, and this kid, I mean, it's he's legit. He's legit. He's going to be a lot of fun. With Caden Durham, I mean, everything, Sonny, seems to be trending towards, man, the marriage, I'll call it, between him and LSU. And I'll look a lot of the social media interaction. I mean, there's a lot of guys in this 2024 class that are, pumping up and a lot of interaction. And Durham's one of the guys that he's not committed, but he's talking a lot about how much he loves LSU. He's interacting with the Colin Hurleys, the Tavion Galloways of the world. I mean, I think we can say, does it feel like LSU's in a good spot right now with Caden Durham as he gets closer to his timeline of when he wants to make a decision?
Yeah, I think so. I think LSU's the team to beat. He visited in March, and I'm trying to think. I want to say it was maybe about a month ago. He came to town, saw LSU. That was his first visit. Came to town, saw LSU, saw what they had to offer. Just raved about the experience, raved about the time, raved about his relationships with his relationship with Frank and Sherman Wilson, and how big those are. And, I also think that LSU has been able to make such a good impression with five-star edge Colin Simmons, four-star safety Kadavian Dotson, also at Duncanville, to where, the parents talk. The parents talk about, hey, what'd you think about LSU? Oh, yeah. I feel the same way. So they can get a lot of that positive reinforcement. Now, it could also get that negative reinforcement if they felt a certain way too. But right now, I think LSU is really in a good position with all three of those guys. And I think a big reason for that is those relationships that they have. And that's what I think has pushed LSU kind of, into what I think is the lead position. That, and then also the depth chart. I don't think they're going to sign a big running back class right here. And the reason why is look at 2025. I mean, you could look at there's probably 6 running backs that you can already look at and say, this guy could play in the SEC. This guy can play. This guy can play in the big. This is a Power 5 guy right here. That's how loaded the state is. I mean, you could go through the names, and one of them is probably going to end up at linebacker in Keelan Moses. So that's just another, just the running back position is crazy in 2025. So LSU knows that it can't take a big class in 2024, even though they could potentially lose after this season, John Emery Jr., Josh Williams, Noah Kane. Even though you could lose 3 guys, I think it would be a lot better for them to set up 2025. You go out, you hopefully sign a guy like Caden Durham, and then you dip into the transfer portal if you need to get a 1-year guy. Yeah. And then that doesn't clog up that depth chart and clog up that roster for that 2025 haul, where you can hopefully go in there and sign a class that, that on paper could rival, these classes that we've seen LSU have in the past that you could go back way back into the Les Miles era when they signed Charles Scott, Richard Murphy, and Keelan Williams all in the same year. You look at the Les Miles era. They certainly signed, had some big running back classes in his group as well. So, I think I think you kind of have to recruit for 2024 to set up 2025. And man, Caden Durham would be a hell of a piece to throw in there with that combination of size and speed that he possesses.
In recruiting, they talk a lot about pipelines and establishing those connections, obviously, with high schools, with the staffs. But you mentioned the parents. And, I mean, if Caden Durham pops and let's say he commits, what does that do for LSU's relationship? And you mentioned a little bit with the Duncanville area. I mean, look, there's a lot of talent over there. It's not just one kid. And the thing is, too, you kind of look at what they have coming down the line over there. It's waves. I mean, this is a program that's churning out some college talent. So, I mean, who can you give credit to, or who is making these relationships out there that we're hearing some positive things out of between Duncanville and LSU and starting to see those relationships strengthen a little bit?
Yeah, I think a big part of it, Sherman Wilson plays a big part in recruiting and has played a big part in helping to establish those relationships and that rapport with those Duncanville players. Started with Colin Simmons, then Kadavian Dotson, then to Caden Durham, and DeCorian Moore, like you mentioned. I think to establish that, and then, of course, obviously those assistant coaches play big roles as well. Robert Steeples, you go down the list, Kerry Cooks, and so on. But I think that to kind of establish that pipeline that you referenced, I think first, you got to get them on campus, and then you got to have some good experiences. You got to have some good experiences to where, they go back and then the community is still talking, and it just carries over, each year, those parents who were sophomore or who were juniors are now seniors and just kind of, and you kind of get the feeling that Duncanville is kind of like that, as far as kind of a little tight-knit program. Yeah. And so establishing that pipeline, and I think is also a little bit tougher in this day and age that we're in because of the transfer portal. Yeah. Back in the day, you didn't have to worry about the transfer portal nearly as much. You could go out, you could sign 2 guys, 3 guys, 4 guys from West Monroe. Well, if one of them didn't pan out, a lot of times, it wasn't a big deal made out of it. Whereas now, I think even when a kid leaves a program after a year or two and hasn't really played a lot and they enter the transfer portal, some want to assign that negative connotation to that, like, oh, they may have done something wrong. The program didn't, the program failed him. It wasn't the kid failing the program. So I think establishing those pipelines is a little bit tougher now because of the transfer portal. But to overcome that, you go out, you sign the guys, you get them there, they produce, they're happy, they're making money at the next level, and you kind of just, then you get to a point to where if you have that instance where 1 or 2 guys don't work out, but hey, we had these who did, and look, you can be one of these over here. So, I think it's something that happens over time, but I think when you look at what LSU has done at Duncanville, you got to feel good about the inroads that they currently have.
Yeah, like what you talked about, the conversations between the parents. What is that? Because it's a lot. We talk about coaches, we talk about the players, but the parents obviously come back and say, and you want to make those trips memorable. Yeah, I think that's the word too. You want to make it something where they come back and say, man, that blew me away. And I think that's what we kind of saw this past weekend with that more official visit type of feeling. Not everyone's rolling out, like you said, the women's national championship head coach a week and a half after she's finished her season. Let's talk.
And something else to kind of point out is that, not only do you have the women's national championship right over here. Oh, look right there is the 2019 national championship trophy for football too. Oh, yeah. And so then you kind of start, okay, this graduate champion slogan that they're talking about, you kind of start to, even though it's not with the football program, it's still part of the overall part of the athletic program. And that can kind of spill over too and kind of give you a little boost as well, I think.
Yeah, I was talking with a high school coach, good friends with her over in Georgia, and he's had some kids get recruited by LSU and go on some visits. And he was telling me, he said, what's your opinion? I said, I hadn't been over there yet. And we both kind of, we both talked about this. LSU seems to be one of those programs, athletics as a whole, they really are well-rounded. And I think you don't see that everywhere. Just in a sense, we talk about the women's basketball. You see 2019 national championship. And I think kids, when they see that, they said, man, it's not just and like what we talked about, the whole athletic department's effort, it's not just a football team leading the charge here. It's everyone's. I mean, this is a really driven athletic department all the way around, wants to graduate champions, like you said. Obviously, football has kind of made that its moniker. Let's talk Kobe Black here. I don't think we can understate the importance of him staying the whole weekend. When you get a kid like this type of talent that you can get to stay the entire weekend, you also you get a former player, which, Sonny, I think if you want to mention that, who took time away from his draft preparation to spend time and had a prior relationship with Kobe Black and his family. I mean, look, this is a kid that, is going to go to Alabama next weekend. And I know when LSU fans see that, you cringe. You hope, man, did we make a good enough push here the previous weekend? What are you hearing? How do you feel like, LSU stands in the eyes of Kobe Black?
I think LSU's definitely, definitely squarely in the mix with him. And I think you're going to start hearing his name mentioned with LSU a little bit more going forward. And you'll probably start to see that build a little bit. But, going to Alabama, I mean, look, Alabama, you want to talk about pointing at trophies and pointing at rings and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, look, they got plenty that they can point to, plenty in recent memory, years over years over years. So they've got that they can point to as well. I think that's the visit that if you're LSU, even though it's an unofficial visit and even though it's the time of the year that we're in, I think that's probably, the visit that LSU that could make it to where, LSU's not in position one. That's how big of an impression I think this weekend made on him. He released a top 11, if I'm not mistaken, not too long ago.
I think last week, yeah.
Yeah, last week. LSU was on that. Well, I think LSU's a lot higher than just in the top 11.
Yeah.
I would even venture to say that, LSU and Alabama going into this visit, that they're probably the two schools outside of Texas that are fighting, that are maybe in the best position to land him. And so, the number 2 cornerback in the country, a 5-star. I don't think LSU is going to have a big cornerback haul in this class simply because of who they went out and got last year.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if Xavier Toviano sticks to safety and nickel, that could potentially open up another spot. But you've already got Zion Ferguson on board. You've got Wallace Foster out of New Orleans. You got him on board. So I don't think you're going to see them load up on cornerbacks like they did in the transfer portal, to where it was just when you looked at the commitment list, it was corner.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to have that big, so if you're not going to have that big class, you've got to have that guy that I think you, at least in the SEC, you've got to have that guy that you're like, okay, this is a potential day one one starter. Guys like LSU has had in the past, Derek Stingley, Tre'Davious White. I mean, there's been several of them. So to be able to get that guy and to kind of feel good about we can put him out there on an island, I think gives you it obviously gives you a little bit of a comfort zone, but then it also kind of helps Robert Steeples and, be able to look and say, okay, we're bringing it back to DBU. We're trying to, we're getting that, I guess that stereotype that LSU had in the past where, there seemed like there was always that 5-star cornerback on the roster.
And there was a day one draft pick every single year lining up.
He would certainly generate those expectations, generate that hype, and would just be at 6'2", I think 6'2", 190. I mean, you look at that size, really good size. So I think that, I think LSU has to like the position that it's in right now. It's got the end with the Jarek Bernard Converse angle that you mentioned. He played at Oklahoma State with Black's brother, who I believe still has 2 years of eligibility left to play. Yeah. And so, he came in, he spent time with him and stuff. You had Toviano. You had the Texas boys who kind of, who hung out with him a lot over the weekend. And so I think that, I think that LSU is in as good of a spot as it could be in right now with that Alabama visit looming, and with him probably looking at June or July before he's ready to make a decision. And and one more caveat is I do think that LSU is a virtual lock to get an official visit now.
That's big.
I do think they did way and more than they needed to secure that official visit, and so I think that I think that you'll see him set that up whenever he sets those up.
That's awesome. That's awesome to see. There's a scheduled commitment coming this week, and LSU's been in on this guy, and it's the 4-star defensive lineman Charleston Collins. Now, LSU's been mentioned in the name, as well as Arkansas, Alabama, Auburn. He's got a nice offer list. This is a kid, though, that, you go to his 24/7 sports page and you see the amount of Razorback logos and that crystal ball prediction. Sonny, you put one in as well. As this gets closer and closer to his commitment date on April 21st, is it feel like it's a lock there that this kid's going to stay home? I mean, he's from Little Rock, Arkansas. Is he going to probably stay home with Arkansas, or where does LSU kind of, go in this situation? And what's that recruitment look like?
Yeah, I think so. I think last November, if I'm not mistaken, is when Steve Wiltfong and I both put crystal ball picks in on LSU. And he was from everything that I heard, he was pretty close to popping. He held off, wanted to take some visits this summer. And the thing that really hurt LSU in this race was Jamar Cain leaving and going to the NFL. Jamar Cain was his lead recruiter. But Collins, I think Collins obviously liked a lot about LSU before that. He camped there last summer. That's where he earned the offer from Cain and BK. And at 6'4", 250 pounds, he would obviously feel a need. They need guys on the defensive line. There's no question about that, especially with him. He's a guy that, you talked about the versatility with Tylen Singleton. He could go safety. Does he go linebacker? I think with Collins is a guy that, he could potentially start off in the defensive end spot opposite of the Jack linebacker, but then grow into an interior guy. Mm-hmm. So you like that versatility. And LSU, whoever they do hire, is going to have an opportunity to get back in on him if he likes him as much as Cain did. Just simply, and I say that because he is an Arkansas guy. He is probably going to pick Arkansas when he does commit on Friday, but there was enough there for him. I don't believe a guy like him, who is as thorough and detailed with recruiting as he is, pretty guarded. Seems like one of those guys who really, really compares which schools check this box, which schools don't check this box. And so when you have a kid like that, I don't believe that he's the type who commits to a school just because of the assistant coach there. It only takes one look to go back and look and say, okay, Jamar Cain spent 1 year at LSU. I think it was 2 years at Oklahoma. He was never anywhere early, in the most recent history, with an extended stay. And so I don't think Collins is the type of guy who would look at that and hinge his commitment solely on Jamar Cain. So that tells me that LSU will be able to, have a chance to get back in there on him if the new D-line coach does like him as much.
Let's talk and let's wrap it up here with Jamar Cain. We kind of teased it last week with our podcast and looking, what the timeline. And Brian Kelly talked about in this press conference. But on the recruiting front, I mean, look, in the short time that I've been talking with kids, Jamar Cain's name comes up. Defense, offense, just the relationship that he builds, especially within the state of Louisiana. For you, obviously, you've seen a lot of kids and have mentioned his name in just the year that he's been on campus. Who rises up into that recruiting guru on this staff? Now, look, I think there's a lot of guys that could fill it, and I don't know if you could necessarily fill the exact position he had, because a lot of it, Sonny's based off of relationships. You can't just step in day one and say, hey, this guy's a great recruiter, he's going to be here. But, I mean, we mentioned a guy like Sherman Wilson that is, I think, fantastic at his job and building the relationships. We mentioned him, obviously, with the Duncanville trio. Is it the new D-line coach? I mean, where do you think LSU finds that next recruiting star on its staff? Jamar Cain kind of left that void.
Yeah, well, I think when you look at the staff, you've got guys who have shown the ability to recruit nationally. And with Jamar Cain, I think that was probably his strongest attribute. If you looked at his resume, was his ability to go out nationally. Deshaun Womack, Jackson Howard, we could go down the list of the guys that he signed at Arizona State and Oklahoma, and that national appeal that he had at both of those places. Joe Sloan's a guy who has done that. I think you're starting to see Robert Steeples, a guy who was a high school head coach, then went to the NFL. And last year was his first taste of really recruiting on the college level. And so I think you're starting to see him grow. But I think a guy who's going to have a big impact going forward in LSU's recruiting department is Frank Wilson. Obviously, he's no newcomer. He's going to take over he's taking over as the recruiting coordinator with Brian Polian moving to the off-field staff role that he's in now. And I think with that, you're going to see Frank Wilson meeting with guys a lot more when they come on visits. Before they go meet with BK, you see him have that talk where now, he's not just the running backs coach and associate head coach, he's the running backs coach, the associate head coach, but also the recruiting coordinator. Yeah. And so that coordinator title within itself, I think can kind of lends more, that when he goes and when he talks to kids, that he can talk to kids who are outside of his territory, who are not running backs, just as equally to where, they're like, I want to hear what he has to say and stuff. And so I think that he's a guy who's going to have a bigger impact and a bigger influence going forward. Obviously the dude's been called the godfather of recruiting in Louisiana forever. So he's not a newcomer to this game, but I do believe you're going to see an increased role and an increased presence from the recruiting side now. Yeah, so he would be that guy. I think that you'll start hearing, you'll hear guys that aren't running backs, aren't from Louisiana. You'll hear him mention his name as other guys who they spent time with over the weekend, who made an impression on them and things like that.
Yeah, that's a busy title right there too. Associate head coach, running backs coach, and recruiting coordinator as well, man. But you know
also
what?
Sounds like
the
a
more
pay
titles,
raise, huh?
Yeah, more titles, the bigger pay raise, I guess, as well. And that's one that LSU definitely wants to keep in the fold. Little update on recruiting. Any other names to continue to watch? I know that there's going to be probably some visitors that we're going to keep an eye on this upcoming weekend that we'll talk about obviously later in the week on the site. But any other names that you're kind of keeping tabs on, maybe that aren't being talked about as much for this 2024 class?
I think Denham Springs, another one of those hybrids, safety / linebacker. Deshaun McBride, he was on campus over the weekend, and I think LSU offered probably maybe a month ago, maybe a little bit under a month ago, if I'm not mistaken. And so the offer's kind of fresh, but he's been on campus several times since then. And I think he's a guy who's getting closer and closer to jumping on board, I believe. You've got Joel Rogers, who's also right outside of Baton Rouge, another safety who I think obviously we know LSU likes, they've offered, and he's a guy that could really feel that strong safety in the box type of role. He's another guy that I think that you kind of, whenever you see him pop up on campus, that you kind of start to, okay, that's another visit. He's getting closer. Yeah. He's another one I think that LSU has a really good shot of landing. And that's why when you look at the safety position and who they could potentially land, that's why when you look at it, you look at a guy like Kadavian Dotson out of Duncanville. I know he still wants to take a couple of more, some more visits and stuff. But then you also have to say, okay, look, we've got these Louisiana guys that we've offered. And I think one thing is safe to say, we saw Ed Orgeron drop some in-state guys who were commitments, and it kind of, you had a little backlash over that. Yeah. Ironically, Major Burns and Jalen Lee were two of those guys, and now they're back at LSU under Brian Kelly. But I don't think that's something that you would see Brian Kelly. Do. And because I think he understands and realizes how hard it is to establish those relationships. And the last thing you want to do is spoil those relationships. So, when it comes to the in-state guys, you have to look at that. Kadavian Dotson I think he has to look at that and has to kind of look at the numbers. And, you hope that someone like that doesn't get left on the outside looking in But the magical thing with these numbers, man, is these staffs they seem to always have a way to work them out.
They seem to. That number seems to kind of fluctuate, and then you try to think. You got your spreadsheet up. You're like, all right, this is how many spots they have left, and then you throw it out the window when you see a kid. Last but certainly not least, Colin Simmons was in the Sunshine State this week, Florida and Miami. He visited. You kind of put this up. I feel like I echoed the same sentiment here. I think NIL is just going to be a massive, massive part of it. And for some kids, it is. For some kids, it isn't. They may say it isn't up front, but is that kind of the way you're going with this? And how does LSU maybe stay in the race? I mean, I know they're still kind of building up the NIL aspect compared to some of the top programs we've seen. They're there, but they're not maybe at the level of an A&M or wherever else was trying to make a push, maybe in Miami, something like that.
I mean, look, when you're the number 3 prospect in the country, the number 1 pass rush specialist, edge guy, you're going to demand a big NIL. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, if we go off what the market demands, then there's no question that there's going to, that he's going to have that, and they're going to expect that too. But what I'm feel pretty good about is that you're not going to see this turn into a bidding. You're not going to see this turn into, okay, well, this one, and I'm just throwing numbers out there. This one, School X offered me 200. Well, they offered me 350. Can you match that? I think what they want, that, what they're going to be looking for is just a fair deal. Just give me a fair deal. And because the reason I say that is I've talked to his mom a couple of times, talking to Collins, and you really get the feeling from talking to his mom that she understands the importance and the value of the education, and that football is second to academics, and you hear that from some, but when you hear it from her, you really get the sense like, okay, this lady understands. This lady's talking business. This lady's not throwing fluff out there just to make things look good. That she has a firm idea on this. So that's why I don't think that this is going to turn into a bidding war. And with that, so that's what made me say that NIL won't be the deciding factor. I think that the education, I think that the opportunity down the line, that the opportunity to make, some people with NIL, they look at what can I make now? A lot more than what can they make later. I think with Simmons and his camp, it's going to be, how can I set myself up now? But the eye is on the future. The eye is on getting to the next level, having that education that you can always fall back on. I think those factors are going to be more important than the overall NIL impact.
It's been interesting, and Mama always knows best, and it sounds like.
And hey, I could
Simmons'
be wrong.
Mama's
I could be wrong, but just reading and just from talking to people, from talking to her, and just getting that vibe, I really feel that.
That's nice. Kind of wrapping up a nice little recruiting weekend for LSU. Sure, they're going to have some visitors, as we're going to talk about later in the week, what that spring game might look like. Might hear some more clarity on that as well. And, man, like you said, Sonny, it's a big weekend in the sense of it's not the game is what it is, but the fanfare, the tailgating, the scene, it kind of gives those kids a glimpse. Some of them who may not have been on campus maybe got that offer in the spring. It gives them a glimpse of what it is going to look like. So another big weekend in the picture. And then before you know it, Sonny, it's going to be camp. It's going to be camp season. And that's going to be a big proving ground for some of the kids that LSU likes, but maybe wants to see a little bit more out of this summer.
That's it. Yep. That'll be that opportunity. Hopefully this weekend, hopefully the crowd's a little better than it has been in the past. Are you familiar with LSU's reputation for spring games?
I am not.
Oh, man. There's been some years to where, they may have said there's 12, 15,000, but it looks like it's about 7 or 8. So LSU does not draw big for spring games. Don't know why. Maybe it's because there's festivals going on all around. You've got baseball, I don't know what no one has ever been able to figure out why, but when you see like Ohio State, you see some of these other places that are getting like 92,000 for the spring game. Yeah, you probably have to combine the last 7 years to reach that.
Well, maybe it'll be better. Maybe it'll be better
Yeah.
on Saturday, and that'd be a good start there. Hey, we thanks so much for tuning in to the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Koon. He is Sonny Shipp. A couple things before we get out of here. Make sure to subscribe if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, and if you're listening in any form, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts, make sure to follow us and subscribe. It costs absolutely nothing. We just want you to continue to follow the podcast as well. And Sonny, correct me if I'm wrong, is today, Tuesday, as we're releasing this, the final day for the 50% off deal. I believe it is. Correct me if I'm wrong. Final day. So you need to make sure you get that. I'm going to put that down in the link on this video on the podcast as well. You can click that, head over to our site because we got some awesome recruiting nuggets. We're going to continue to put some great stuff out. Recruiting, baseball, obviously. Gets another big series win over Kentucky this past weekend, and continuing their march to Hoover, and then hopefully to a super regional Omaha, and then the whole 9 yards, so we can get our man Glenn West put up in a hotel somewhere in Omaha and have himself a nice little month of June. So we'll see how that works out. Thanks so much for tuning in. This has been another episode of the Go 24/7 podcast.